1772, the most powerful corporation on earth ran out of money. Not a small company, not a startup, a company with its own army, its own navy, its own currency, a company that ruled 30 million people and collected more tax revenue than most European kingdoms. And when it came begging to the government for a rescue, the British Parliament faced a question no one had ever asked before. What do you do when a company is too big to fail? Their answer saved the company. It also, and I promise this is true, helped start the American Revolution. This is the story of the world's first corporate bailout. And if parts of it sound familiar, that's the point. The East India Company started in 1600 as a spice trading business. 218 investors, one royal charter, and a monopoly on English trade with Asia. For 150 years, it did what trading companies do. Bought low in India, sold high in London, made its shareholders comfortably rich. Then, in 1757, everything changed. At the Battle of Plassey, the company's private army defeated the ruler of Bengal, the richest province in India. And 8 years later, the Mughal emperor handed the company something no business had ever held before: the Diwani, the legal right to collect taxes from Bengal itself. Read that again. A corporation, with shareholders, dividends, and a board of directors, was now the tax authority for 20 to 30 million people. The money was staggering. Roughly £3 million a year flowed in. In today's terms, hundreds of millions. The company wasn't trading with an empire anymore. It was the empire. Back in London, the stock went vertical. Everyone wanted in. Politicians owned shares. Bankers owned shares. Speculators borrowed money to buy shares, because how could taxing an entire country ever go wrong? The company, flush with confidence, raised its dividend. Then raised it again. By 1771, it was paying shareholders 12.5%. A payout set not by what the company earned, but by what the shareholders wanted to hear. Remember that detail. It matters. Here's what the stock price didn't show. In Bengal, the company was a catastrophic government. It had one real policy: extract. Taxes stayed brutal in good years, and, this is the horrifying part, in bad ones. In 1769, the monsoon failed. Crops died. And in 1770, Bengal collapsed into one of the deadliest famines in human history. Somewhere around a third of the population perished. The company's response: tax collection in the famine year was enforced with such rigor that revenue barely dipped. Some officials privately admitted collections were kept up violently. Millions of the company's own taxpayers were dying. And the dividend in London went up. This is the part of the story where you should hear a quiet alarm bell, because a business that pays out more while its actual foundation is collapsing isn't reporting reality. It's performing it. The company's costs were exploding. Wars, forts, a standing army of tens of thousands. Its warehouses in London were stuffed with tea it couldn't sell, because smugglers undercut its taxed prices. It owed customs duties to the government. It owed the Bank of England. It owed everyone. And it papered over all of it with short-term loans, rolling debt forward month after month, betting that tomorrow's revenue would cover yesterday's promises. All it needed was for nothing to go wrong. On June 8, 1772, a Scottish banker named Alexander Fordyce got on a boat to France. He wasn't going on holiday. He was fleeing. Fordyce had been secretly gambling his bank's money, including a massive bet against East India stock, and he'd lost, catastrophically. Rather than face his partners, he simply left. His bank collapsed within days, and because 18th century banks were all tangled together in webs of credit, the collapse spread like fire through dry grass. London, Edinburgh, Amsterdam. Banks failed across 2 countries in weeks. Credit, the invisible fluid the whole economy ran on, froze solid. Sound familiar? It should. This was 2008 with powdered wigs. And standing directly in the path of the fire, the East India Company, the most indebted institution in Britain, whose entire survival depended on rolling over short-term loans, in a market where nobody was lending anymore. In July 1772, the company asked the Bank of England for help. It got a little. It needed more. By August, the directors were staring at bills coming due. Over £1 million they simply did not have, including hundreds of thousands owed to the government itself. The unthinkable was suddenly on the table. The company that ruled India, the cornerstone of British trade, the stock and half of Parliament's portfolios, was weeks from collapse. And here's where the story stops being about a company and becomes about a question we still haven't answered 250 years later. If it fails, it takes the economy down with it. If you save it, you teach every giant that recklessness has no price. What do? Parliament did what governments have done ever since. It held furious hearings, expressed its outrage, demanded answers, and then wrote the check. In 1773, the government loaned the company £1.4 million, an enormous sum, to keep it breathing. But here's what makes this the first true bailout rather than just a loan. The money came with strings. The Regulating Act of 1773 gave the British state real power over the company for the first time. Government oversight of its Indian administration. A governor general answerable to London. Dividend caps. No more paying shareholders with imaginary money. The deal every bailout since has followed. We save you. We own a piece of you. Here's the trick the company had been running from the start. Paying dividends based on revenues it booked, not cash it collected, while hiding the gap in short-term paper that had to be endlessly renewed. Booked riches, borrowed reality. Companies still fail exactly this way today. But there was one more problem to solve. Remember those warehouses full of unsold tea? 17 million pounds of it? Rotting in London while the company drowned. So Parliament passed a second law in 1773. A clever little scheme to turn that dead tea into cash. The Tea Act let the company ship its surplus directly to the American colonies, cheap, undercutting every local merchant and smuggler in the market. To London, it was an elegant piece of financial engineering. Rescue the company. Move the inventory. Everyone wins. The colonists read it differently. To them, it was a monopoly, propped up by a corrupt government being forced into their harbors. With a tax attached, they'd never voted for. On the night of December 16th, 1773, a group of them boarded those ships in Boston Harbor and threw 342 chests of bailout tea into the sea. You know what happened next. Escalation, occupation, Lexington, revolution. Trace the chain backward. A superpower is born because of a protest against a tea law passed to rescue a corporation that collapsed because it paid dividends with money it didn't have. The world's first too big to fail didn't just get bailed out. It accidentally redrew the map of the world. Since 1772, the pattern has repeated on a loop. An institution grows until its failure threatens everyone. It takes bigger risks because it knows that. It breaks. The government saves it. And everyone swears, never again. 1929, 1998, 2008. The East India Company limped on for another 80 years under growing state control until Britain finally absorbed it entirely. The first company too big to fail eventually became too controlled to exist. So here's the question for the comments. And I genuinely want your take. Was Parliament right to save it? Let it burn, and the whole economy might have gone with it. Save it, and you invent moral hazard. A lesson every giant since has learned by heart. 250 years later, we're still choosing. And if you want more stories about the schemes, collapses, and cons that built the modern economy, another one's on screen now.